This mini lecture presentation should inform you of the minimum requirements for your final draft of Major Paper Assignment 3 and abbreviated commentary on student examples. Along the way, you'll get guidance on how to structure and format each part of the final draft. On these next slides, I will walk you through the Major Paper Assignment 3 rubric item by item. You can follow along by opening the Major Paper Assignment 3 rubric in a Microsoft Word document or PDF. You will notice that I've started with the Content and Application section, which identifies each part of the body and thesis that you'll need to include in order to be successful with this assignment. Your final draft should present a research-driven decision memo that is based on documented evidence. You should integrate and properly cite research sources to support your recommendation, options for action, and the policy history that you've established as part of your background of the problem. Your argument should establish clear criteria for evaluating each of the different alternatives for action, such as cost, available resources, time, or other factors that you consider relevant to this argument. In your discussion, you should present at least 2 options for addressing the problem. These should be realistic and include concrete details to support your discussion. You must include clear, concrete, and compelling evidence for the benefits of your recommendation. In other words, which course of action is best and why. Your background section should include comprehensive description of the policy history surrounding the issue under study. Your policy history should review existing policies, whether these come in the form of bills, laws, regulations, or both, and then describe what has occurred. In other words, what administration is willing to do and what they have been unwilling to do. In the case of COVID-19, you might find that the policy history section needs a little bit more of a comparison with different pandemic measures in other contexts. You might establish other local or national COVID policies to compare recent actions in your community with what has happened globally and locally. You might also compare more recent actions for COVID-19 with existing pandemic measures in other contexts, such as for influenza. Your conclusions about the policy history analysis and other background information on the problem, each alternative, and your recommendation are each the elements of your central argument, but your specific recommendation for resolving the issue should serve as a thesis. In that sense, your thesis should be specific, debatable, and research-based. You must also take care to avoid poor reasoning in your argument. Again, you'll want to make sure that your statements and claims are accurate. If you notice that there are some overgeneralized statements or other gaps in reasoning, address those before you turn in your draft. As you saw, you'll want to make sure that you have a comprehensive, nuanced description of the policy history. You'll want to represent the diversity of perspectives surrounding the crisis. Again, you'll want to make substantive connections to research and relevant course materials. You need to think about your audience's needs and the specific decision maker that you are writing to. So again, you'll want to refer to Course Pack Week 10A, which has discussion of audience and audience-centered writing. You'll also want to make sure that you perform some background research on your audience to determine what they might not know and what they already do. So you'll want to make sure to avoid restating or spending much more time describing general or common information that's already available. You'll want to introduce revelatory points and uncover parts of the policy history that are not necessarily obvious. You will notice that for public policy documents, Formatting and memo style often goes along with organization and flow because the structure of your memo should be reflected in the global system of headings and subheadings that are shown in your document. I'll go over some specific formatting and memo style guidelines a little bit later in this presentation. For now, we'll focus on the general structure of your memo. So you may recall that your global organization should follow a general flow from problem to solution. You can also see Course Pack Week 10B, which reviews policy histories and decision memos, as well as the example decision memo that you can find on Canvas in the learning materials for Module 3. You can also review Course Pack Week 10A, Chapter 2, for strategies on generating and organizing your argument. Next, we'll take a look at style and language. Now, you will notice here that in comparison to previous assignments, direct address, in other words, referring to the reader as you, and use of other personal pronouns, such as we, are acceptable here. However, you should avoid vague or inconsistent terminology. I'll give you one example. In the case of neighborhood revitalization or addressing the problem of brownfields, one problem that you would notice if you're reading a document on this particular subject would be if the author would use the term abandoned buildings and brownfields interchangeably. The problem with using inconsistent terminology is that your reader may have difficulty interpreting what your argument actually says. You will recall that arguments of definition do focus on common terminology and shared understanding of a particular concept. If you are to use abandoned buildings and brownfields interchangeably, this presents a problem because one term, abandoned buildings, is more general. The word brownfields itself is a specific type of abandoned building that once had an industrial purpose. For specific style principles and guidelines, you can review Course Pack Week 11A, which discuss improving your writing at the sentence, word, section, and paragraph levels, respectively. As far as formatting and memo style, please take note that this particular document should be formatted differently than comparison to your previous papers. You will notice that there is a set structure of global headings and subheadings for decision memo documents with an integrated policy history analysis. I will walk you through that specific format shortly. For now, please take note of the following guidelines for margins and font. The next slide will review some basic tips for formatting decision memos. As you proofread your paper, you should ensure that you have followed standard English grammatical conventions. By now, you should have an idea of the most common mistakes you've made in previous papers. So, I recommend that you review the writing process page for an interactive guide to grammar and writing, as well as other resources for grammar and writing. I'll briefly outline some expectations regarding the in-text citations. As you can see on the screen, you should make sure that all of the in-text citations that you've included for direct quotes, paraphrases, or summaries of your research resources should match the entries in the references list. And each entry within the references list and in the body of the text are formatted correctly. Beyond that, you will want to make sure that for each text you are citing, that you are acknowledging the correct author, authors, or the title of the text. Make sure that all the bibliographic information in your references list matches the bibliographic information in the text. Again, you should have 6 to 8 sources or more cited in the body of the memo.
At least 4 of these sources should come from the collaborative research pool. These sources can be those you've contributed to the research pool or those that your partner or other students in the class have posted to the collaborative research pool.
Again, you should use standard margins, 1 inch all the way around, and font, 12-point Times New Roman. This document should be double-spaced. You must also use APA style for the document header.
APA style guidelines for the running header state that you should type the title of your memo in all capital letters. If your memo title is long, you'll want to make sure to use the first 50 characters of the title. The title would appear flush left with the page margin. Then, to the far right, you would place the page number, where I've indicated the pound sign. So what you'll see again is the page number is flush right, and on the opposite side, you should see the memo title in all capital letters.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, you should use a different type of information block. Instead of the MLA style information block that you are used to formatting, you should use the decision memo address block instead. You will notice that in the example decision memo, there are 4 lines of text. The first line of text includes the to address line, which would, again, list who your audience is. Then, the next line should include the from address line, which would list all of your names. Then, underneath, you can include either the date, which would be the due date for the assignment, or you can include the subject. Where you decide to include the date or subject does not matter as long as it is included at some point on page 1 at the very beginning of the document. Now, as far as your section headings and subheadings, you should use font alterations exactly as shown. For one, as you are looking at the decision memo address block, you should not include brackets, as you see here, around names and other lines in the address block. You can use bold text for the to, from, date, and subject lines. Then, you should use bold text for Level A or Level 1 headings. You will notice that for the executive summary, bold text is used. This represents the first level of headings in the document. As you scroll through this document, you will notice some sections have underlined text. With this in mind, then, recall that you should underline text for Level B or Level 2 headings. So you'll notice, for example, the first part of the criteria section in this document uses bold text for the Level A headings. Then, for each section heading within the Level A section, we'd have underlined text for each criterion in that section. So again, for Level B, the text is underlined. You will notice that there are no Level C or Level 3 headings within this document. If you have questions about how to format any additional subheadings, please contact me directly. Another important note for formatting this document is that for memo format, you would not indent the first paragraph in a section, especially since you have a Level A heading just above the text. So, after the first paragraph, you should then indent each paragraph that follows normally. Again, this would be 1/2 inch to the right, which is the normal measurement for indentations in APA style. As you review the decision memo example document, you may remember that you have some options for how to structure the criteria section. You can look back at Course Pack Week 10B, Chapter 10, the Decision Memo, to recall different options for how to structure the criteria section. You'll see that you have at least 3 different options for how to integrate and reference the criteria within the body of the memo. Finally, your
references list,
which again would be annotated with paragraphs after each entry, should appear on a separate page. You'll get some more information about how to approach the annotated bibliography on the next slide. Although this is an annotated bibliography assignment, you should title the page as
references,
and use the proper formatting conventions for APA style in terms of the sources you are citing. As far as the annotations, you should include a paragraph of summary and evaluation for each source cited in the body of the paper. In other words, you should include at least 2 paragraphs that do the following, as outlined in the rubric. The paragraph of summary should include clear descriptions of the source's main points and concrete details to explain the main points to some degree. In the second paragraph, you should briefly analyze and evaluate the source's content. You may recall that for the collaborative research documents assignments, I included prompts for evaluation like examining the background of the author or authors, examining the background of the sponsor or publisher, examining the background of the publication itself, in other words, the type of source, such as a book, magazine, newspaper, and so on. Then, you can discuss if any of the claims and evidence in the source can be confirmed or disputed. In other words, do other sources on the same topic agree or disagree on the facts and claims? Is any information left out of the source in front of you? You can also examine factors like currency or diversity when analyzing the content for evaluation. You can see a strong example of an annotated bibliography in the learning materials for Module 3. As far as where you can find all of these different materials on
Canvas,
you should review the Week 14B session overview video for details. The last section of the Major Paper Assignment 3 rubric includes a section that discusses collaborative effort and your group work log. Again, you should submit a complete, comprehensive group work log and team contract along with the final draft. What I recommend is looking over the Approaching Group Projects handout, which includes an example of an individual progress log. You should use this progress log as a basis for developing individual entries for each of you. Then you can combine the individual progress logs into one group work log, which should catalog each of your contributions to the project, including for the collaborative research documents assignment to the final draft. Your activity plan in your team contract should also be reflected in the group work log. In other words, as you are reviewing who completed each task, you should describe in detail how you went about completing each of the tasks. You can also include a time estimate, especially if you worked on this project outside of class. If you need to refresh yourself on when each of the course meetings regarding this project began, I recommend referring to the course timetable. Again, you will notice that the timetable is color-coded to represent synchronous and asynchronous meetings. For synchronous meetings, you will want to note which group members were present and how much time you spent during the scheduled class period to complete each of the activities. Depending on your process for composing this assignment, you may have divided up paper sections amongst you. If this is how you have delegated tasks on this project, You should make sure that the writing voice blends each of your different writing styles into one cohesive style.
As you know by now, the percentages that you earn for each criterion within the rubric will convert to points. You'll see that content will be worth 50 points. Application will also be worth 50 points. Arrangement and voice will be worth 20 points each. Mechanics, which would include your grammar and formatting, will be worth 25 points. The annotated bibliography will be worth 20 points. Finally, your teamwork or collaborative effort will be worth 15 points. This will bring you a grand total of 200 points possible for the assignment. Your point values will then convert to a percentage or letter grade. Before we conclude, I want to provide some very abbreviated commentary on some different student examples for Major Paper Assignment 3 with reference to the final draft. So to find the final draft examples, as well as the group work log, annotated bibliography, and other parts of your project, you'll want to go into the modules area. Select Module 3 and go to Learning Materials. So toward the bottom of the main materials collection section of this page, you'll see the student examples collection. Toward the very bottom of the page, you'll see the different final draft examples with Grammarly reports and grading feedback. Please note that these examples use MLA documentation. This semester, you will use APA documentation. If you'd like to see an annotated bibliography using APA 6, you'll go back to the Learning Materials page to find the supplemental resources for the annotated bibliography. What you'll do is scroll down to find the supplemental resources and click on Annotated Bibliography. From here, you'll see there's an Annotated Bibliographies handout, a sample annotated bibliography for college writing 2, and a checklist. So for our reference, we'll look at the sample annotated bibliography quite briefly. Again, you will see here that the bibliography uses APA 6. The student should have started the reference list on a new page, and the sample comes from an assignment that differs from Major Paper Assignment 3. You should cite and reference 6 to 8 sources in your paper. We'll now go back to the different student examples of the Major Paper Assignment 3 final draft. If you're in the annotated bibliography, you can go back to the Learning Materials page by clicking on this link here. We'll now go back to the student examples collection. When you scroll to the bottom of the page, again, you're going to see these different examples. I've posted a strong example and a weak example. You'll also notice that with the strong example, this group still needed to adjust their memo to fit the decision memo criteria. You'll see that discussed in the rubric feedback, and the Grammarly report will show you all the different surface level elements that the student group could have corrected. So again, you'll be able to view the final draft, the strong example rubric, and the Grammarly report. You'll see the final draft weak example document. You'll then be able to download the weak example rubric and the Grammarly report. You'll then be able to compare across these different examples how these students performed and how their work was evaluated. And again, you'll be able to see where they should have adjusted their work further, especially thinking about things like your grammar, style, and surface level elements. But again, to see more discussion and analysis of these drafts, characteristics, and evaluative features, you'll want to review the rubric. You'll notice that as you click on the rubric, that the rubric design is much different than what you have seen this semester. In between spring of 2020 and fall of 2021, I've redesigned my rubrics. So what I want to do
is compare this grading rubric to the existing one. You'll see that there are a lot of similarities going into the criteria. What you'll then do is take a look at the notes. So again, you can see that the reason that I took so much time to write notes is because the rubric criteria descriptions were not as precise as the ones that I created in the redesign. So you'll find that the commentary for your draft for the final version will be less detailed than this. However, these notations should help you critically examine the examples and decide where you can adjust your words and where you could go even further than these examples.
If you still have questions about what you need to do for this session, you can post in our general forum. For specific questions about your work in the class, collaborating, and communication within your team, please contact me directly.